So let's get going. So conflict resolution. Today, we will be talking about conflict resolution and providing some tips, tools, and strategies as a measure of understanding conflict resolution. So in today's session, we want to identify some norms, some practices that we can begin to put in place as a measure of having conversation in this section, and it's seek to understand and then to be understood. So if a person is talking or they're giving a critique or a feedback about something that you're listening to, make sure that you're understanding what they're talking about, and then you can be understood as well. Everyone has an equal voice and is valuable in contribution in this particular session. So I don't want you to feel like you can't come off mute and talk or even put your comments or suggestions in the chat. I would love to have your perspective at any point in time as we venture through this. As Mr. Barnett mentioned, this is an interactive session. I'd love to hear more from you and less of me, but we can certainly move forward through the content. And then I want you all to begin to assume positive intent and suspend your judgment. Whatever you're thinking, sensing, or hearing about conflict resolution, suspend that judgment right now. Let's start from a fresh place. I know that a lot of you have probably heard of conflict resolution before, but let's begin to think of this as a positive experience that you'll have. And so I want you all to look at this screen and tell me, what do you see when you look at this picture? You can come off mute, you can put it in the chat, but I want to know what you see when you look at this picture.
The old school rock'em sock'em robot. Somebody getting their block knocked off.
Absolutely. Mr. Lunsford, I see you were off mute. We've got some people in the chat.
Lydia, I just wanted to say that safety and security is not able to use your chat because I'm sharing my screen.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Miss Ann, I do see your comment about drama. Anybody else? What do you see when you look at this picture? Rock'em sock'em toys. Yes. Yep. So it's not just rock'em sock'em. It is about the view that you have. When I was a kid, rock'em sock'em was my thing. I am the girl of two other older brothers. I am the youngest and I am the baby, and they would never let me win. They will always rock my head up. And so rock'em sock'em was one of those things that I thought about, shoot, if I can get into a conflict with somebody, I'm knocking their head clean off. That was the thought process that I had. What else do you all see when you look at this picture? I see someone said, makes me think of anger. Yeah. When you're thinking about anger, you're not only thinking about what that person did to you, but how you can get back at that person. Today, we'll be learning about defining conflict resolution. We'll be talking about good and bad conflicts. We'll talk about the circle of conflict, and then some tips and tools on how to resolve the conflict. Does that sound appropriate today? Everybody up for learning that type of stuff? Go ahead and drop in the chat yes or no if you can agree to those things that we're going to learn about today. Perfect. All right. Keep them coming. I want to make sure everybody is kind of in agreement about this, so we can all rest assured that we understand what conflict resolution is. We can identify that there's good and bad conflict, that there is a circle of conflict, and then tips on how to resolve them. And so what is one word that comes to mind when you hear the word conflict? Drop that in the chat. Feel free to come off mute, but drop it in the chat. What is one word that comes to mind? Fight. Yes. Differences, disagreements. Yep. Keep them coming. What are some words? Argue. Yep. Custodial services. I want to see y'all typing in here. Debating. Disagreements. Understanding. Drama. Confrontation. Yep. Anger. So when you're thinking about the word conflict, some of the words that we're associating with conflict are typically negative. But as we go through the presentation, we'll identify that not all conflict is bad conflict. And so what is conflict? It is a perceived disagreement that hinges on differing views about opinions, attitudes, beliefs, needs, and values. Where would you say that the majority of your conflicts lie? Is that in opinions, attitudes, beliefs, needs, or values? And when we say needs, meaning what you need as a person to feel like you are being received or that people can agree with you. So what are some things? I see misunderstandings, the clashings of things. Yeah. Yep. Please note again that conflict is the perceived disagreement. It is what you believe to be the problem. It might not necessarily be everybody's problem, but it's what you think it is. So is conflict good for you? Yes or no? Is conflict good for you? No. Miss Owens? Anybody else? It's stressful. That is true. Is conflict good for you? A lot of you were saying no. It can be. Yep. Well, conflict is good for you. The best solutions emerge when people feel comfortable sharing their ideas, even when they have to say it challenges the status quo. So whatever you have to say is necessary. You are allowed to communicate in the space. Conflict is good for us when done respectfully, when done in its natural state. It becomes the challenge when we flip it and we begin to hear the unhealthy side of conflict. Yeah, healthy versus unhealthy. Thank you, Asia. So how many types of conflict are there on a number or scale of 1 to 10? How many different types of conflict are there? Drop your number in the chat. 1 through 10, what's the number of conflict types there are? Eight, 6, 4, 2, I don't know, 5, okay. 7, keep coming. Melvina, are they giving you any numbers in your chat? No problem. So there are 3 types of conflict. There's the good, the natural, and the bad. And we will look at the good as being the healthy conflict and the bad as being unhealthy conflict. And then we as individuals have natural conflict. We have conflict that can arise within ourselves, or we have conflict that happens as a measure of one of those 5 things: our beliefs, our values, our needs. There are only 3 types of conflict. And so when you do the comparison of the conflicts and what they have to offer, it's important that we look at them from the standpoint that when you're looking at a healthy conflict, parties are respecting each other. But when you're looking at it as an unhealthy conflict, there's a lack of respect for each other. And what does a lack of respect look like? It's talking over each other. It's being in disagreement itself in relationship to another person's feeling or perspective. When you were a kid, did anybody tell you treat others how you want to be treated? That was commonplace for a lot of people. Treat others how you want to be treated. Now the sentiments are teach people how to treat you, because not everybody's feeling about treating is what is valid. And so looking at the unhealthy versus the healthy, you can actually go down the list and see that in a healthy conflict, people are calm, they're not defensive. And so some of the defensive behaviors that we might not even recognize that we're doing are folding our arms while a person is talking to us, or nodding our head constantly as a person is trying to say what they're thinking. You're not actively listening to resolve the conflict, you're waiting to get your point across. In unhealthy conflicts, a person is focused on winning the conflict and not the potential resolution of a problem. How many of you have ever been in a conflict with someone and the only thing they did was kept talking over you? Yeah, okay, yeah, okay, yeah, okay. They wanted you to move on, but they never understood or took the time to hear what you had to say, which was totally disrespectful, but it's an unhealthy form of conflict. And so again, the 3 types of conflict are those good conflicts, the natural, and the bad. The reasons for conflict, as we mentioned, were those 5 areas, but they also can live inside a circle of conflict. Reasons why conflict happens. Anyone, I'd like you to go to the chat and tell me what you believe the number 1 reason is for a conflict. Looking at this circle, pick which one you believe is the reason for conflict. And you can go to the chat with that. I'd love to see your response in the chat. Yeah. I at least like to see 10 more people respond, but I do see relationships out there, values.
Safety and security is noting relationships.
Thank you. Yep. Value, data conflicts. Yep. Yep. So let's take a moment to kind of walk around the circle a bit. So in relationships, people have strong emotions about how they feel or about what they're experiencing. There's also miscommunications. There's also that repetitive behavior. Change behavior is the best behavior, but when you constantly are nagging at a person or putting a person in a situation that's causing them to continuously question something, that repetitive nature or negative behavior becomes a part of the relationship conflict. When you're looking at the external, you're looking at moods. So an individual might not necessarily feel particularly about something, but it's the mood that they're in. Have you ever heard somebody say, oh, you must be having a mood swing, or today's not your day? When you're looking at it from the standpoint of children, conflict can arise, safety and security, when you're dealing with kids and their moods. They might not necessarily know how to adapt or adjust to their feelings. Secretaries, when you have those parents that are coming into a building, or even when you get the kids that come into a building or ride on a bus, they might come in heavily medicated in the morning. So they're the friendliest thing. But as we, venture throughout the day, they begin to tear up buildings or go after us. That's a part of moods. We deal with those values, those core beliefs, those things that innately are inside of us. There's also the data conflict. So poor interpretation of poor interpretation of information, or it can be the communication in which we receive something. It might not necessarily be the way that we are typically used to receiving something. So it might create a conflict there. There's the conflict of interest, regardless if it's perceived or actual. There's a competition that brews within inside of us. And then there's the structural conflict, and that's unequal resources that could be within our management frame, that could be just us specifically, but those structural conflicts are what make up the circle of conflict. Again, you all gave me what you believe was the number 1. The number 1 in this particular article was that relationships was the reason for conflict. So if you said relationships, hats off to you. You understood. Now, what I want you to do is just take a really good look at what is on the screen now. This is a diagram of multi-generational workforce communication, influences, and traits. And I want you to be aware that within custodial services and the secretarial frame, all 4 generations are represented within our workforce. We have those traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, and Gen Y. If you can drop in the chat which one of those generations you are, I'd love to see how we are diverse across this conversation. So in the chat, if you can put in there what your generation is. I'll go ahead and do mine. I am a Gen Y. Okay, we got a couple boomers on the call. I see a whole lot of X's and Y's. Yeah. Now, you might be asking, why are we talking about multi-generational workforces? Conflict can arise because of multi-generational workforces. It's not necessarily the want of the generations, but it just happens because things are different. I want you to also take another look and see if any of the three things, there's communication, influences, and traits. Do you agree with those as it lines up with your generation? Or would you say that they're off a little bit? I know that from the perspective of traditionalists, we might not have a lot of people on the call to speak up for that, but I'd like you to come off mute if you believe that what aligns with your generation also aligns with your communication, your influences, and your traits. So let's phrase the question a bit differently. If you are a baby boomer, do you believe that your communication style is what they say your communication style is, that you're comfortable communicating on the phone and you like to be collaborative in groups? Yes or no? If you are a boomer, would you say yes or no? If you're a Gen Xer, would you say yes or no that your style of communication aligns? And a Gen Y, would you say your communication aligns? I'm just wondering if your communication aligns because it then tells me if your traits are appropriate. Okay. I see some people saying most, not all. No, no. Okay.
Lydia, that's pretty spot on for me.
Perfect. Thank you. I think the one thing that we have to be very mindful of is that when we show up at work and we are a multi-generational workforce, that we have to be aware of how each other communicates. So a person who is a traditionalist probably communicates out of their influences. So they dealt with the Great Depression. They were hardworking. They were self-sacrificing. On the previous call, I was mentioning how my grandfather, he was a traditionalist. And the only way that their household ran is that every other Friday, he brought his check to my grandmother. That was their conflict. He wanted some money, but she said, every bill needs to be paid before you get some money. And so that was how, my grandparents lived their life. Between the boomers, my parents were boomers. And so looking at how me being a Gen Yer, looking at how I received information from them, I consider myself to be a boomer in spirit, although I am physically a Gen Y by birth. It certainly is one of those things where you've taken up those things and you allow them to translate down. And so when you think about our conflicts, they're not necessarily between coworker to coworker, they're between individual to individual. So when you have a parent who's coming in and, they might see a Gen Y secretary on their phone texting, they don't realize that Gen Yer might be talking to their administrator in the building. They just see somebody texting. And it's saying, oh, they're lazy, they're not working, they're not doing their job, or those millennials need to get it together, those young folks, And the same could be said if you flip that for a boomer. A Gen Y might be saying, why are they so rough? They don't need to do all that. I got to act for that. We can make these, we can make the vacuums move just by pushing the robot button. Push down on the button and move it, A boomer might be saying, well, you need to put your back into it, get your arm work going. Safety and security, you all might be looking at it from the perspective of how do I relate to these Gen Yers because they are so disrespectful. It's the conflict. It's the way that you were raised. It is the influences that you have that are appropriate. Some people identify with being a latchkey generation. Others can apply, knowledge and information based off of their experiences of 9/11 or the wars or the Great Depression or even the Civil Rights Movement. So as you look at this, know that although individuals are experiencing the same conflict as you, they might be bringing a different perspective to the conflict. Are there any questions about anything that you've heard so far relating to conflict resolution? And if you can put in the chat for me a 3, meaning I got it, we can move on. 2, meaning I'm okay, but I'd like to know more about that later. Or 1, can you hold up? So we need to talk about that some more. 3, meaning we can move forward. 2, meaning you need a little bit of assistance. And 1, meaning I need to talk about this in more detail. Go ahead and drop your number in the chat. All right. It looks like we're moving on. We've got a whole lot of 3s out there. So I want to talk to you all about a thing called crucial conversation. How many of you are familiar with crucial conversation? You can give me a head nod, a hand wave, a thumbs up in your reactions. But in Crucial Conversations, there is a part in the book that talks about the path to action. What we want to be aware of is how we show up. So as a human being, we see or we hear someone say something, right? We then tell ourselves a story about the assumption of what that person is talking about. How many of you have ever assumed that you knew what a person was going to say before they said it? I know I have. How many of you have assumed that a person was talking something about you and it had nothing to do with you at all? Yeah. So we tell ourselves a story about what we believe. We then feel how we're going to feel about what we told ourselves in that story. And then we act out on it based off of what we told ourselves. But the reality of the matter is your perception is your reality. Mr. Barnett has said that to me very, very frequently in our conversations. The perception is the reality in the matter. And so what a person believes is how they're going to act out how they feel, and it will show up in work. And so what we need to do is really take a conscious look at what we're allowing to hear or what we're allowing ourselves to hear. And so when you see something or hear something, you have to assume positive intent. When you tell yourself a story, you also have to suspend your judgment. Maybe that person is just having a rough day. And maybe they're just, maybe it's word vomit on you and it does not have anything to do with you. My supervisor tells us often, don't take it personal. It's really business. It's not about you specifically. This is about the work. How you feel about something also dictates how the office feels. And so if there's a whole lot of complaining going on, and you're wondering why, it might be that story you told yourself or that story that you allowed somebody to tell you that wasn't the real story. So make sure you get that ground information before you begin to assume something. So a path to action also says that you need to hear something and hear something in order to tell yourself a story, to feel some type of way, and then to create an action plan based on that. Those are also steps that you can take in order to resolve a conflict. You hear or see something. You have to reinterpret that, reflect on it. You tell yourself a story, but then you go and ask the person what could potentially be the issue. You feel how you're going to feel about it, and then you create an action plan based on your next steps. When you can't control what's happening, challenge yourself to control the way that you respond to what's happening. That is where your power is. When you cannot control what's happening, challenge yourself to control the way you respond to what's happening. That is your power. Have you ever heard the statement, they made me so mad? Or they're making me mad? So here's the real truth. Only you can make you mad. You control the way you respond. If your response is negative or off-putting, it's what you chose. No one can make you feel that way. I'll leave this statement up here for just a second. Some of you might be wanting to post that on your wall. But when you can't control what's happening, challenge yourself to control the way that you respond to what is happening. So we'll look at the 5 cycles of responding to a conflict. And so, or the 5 styles of responding to a conflict. Some of you are avoiders, meaning that you actually see a conflict and you run as far as you possibly can away from the conflict. There might be a conflict in your face, but you just walk away because you're an avoider. I don't want to have this conversation right now. I can't talk about this. There are others. I'm sorry, was someone going to say something? Okay. There are others of you that deal in harmonizing, which deals with the I lose, you win scenario, which doesn't really meet the need of the person because they're just bowing out gracefully. They're doing something to harmonize in the space. There is the directing, which is the I win, you lose, meaning you're going to do it my way or the highway. There's no exception to the rule. We're directing a person on what they should be doing. So it's an I win, you lose. Then we move to cooperating or collaboration, where it's an I win, you win. My preference is this, but what would you like to add to it? Both people are getting a need satisfied, but the one that actually is where most people should sit and rest is in this compromising. I win some, you win some. We all learned that not everybody wins everything. You've got to take a loss at some point in time, but the loss looks like a collaboration. I'll meet you halfway. Let's make a deal. Let's work on this together. And that gives a person the ability to actually feel like they're valued in the situation. And so responding to a conflict, you want to get into a space where you're able to compromise how you're feeling, and also provide some insight that supports the win-win situation for everyone. Are there any questions about this 5 styles of responding to conflict? Okay. So we'll also look at the 6 steps to resolve conflict. So there are ways that you can go about resolving a conflict. One is dealing in respect. Another one is assessing the tone in which you're delivering a message. And then ensuring that it's timely. So looking at these 6 steps, you want to set the stage. You don't want to go into a conflict or resolving a conflict and say, no, you're going to listen to me. No one's hearing you. You resolve the issue and set the stage by simply saying, I'd like to discuss this matter with you. Do you have time? And when would you be available? You give a person who is on the other end of the conflict the ability to come in and say that there is space for them to talk about it now, because everybody's not ready when you're ready to discuss the issue. You've got to give people space, place, and agency to deal with some things on their terms. You want to describe the conflict. If there is a conflict that's arising or brewing between you and a staff member, you and a coworker, you and a student, you want to describe that conflict. And for the student-facing resolution of a conflict, please make sure that it's not just you and the student. Make sure that it's you and someone else and the student, so that you all can amicably come to a resolve. And it also protects and safeguards you if there be anything that arises during those conversations. You also want to gain perspective. So not every person is dealing with things from the actual reality perspective. You want to be able to gain their perspective on why they're feeling how they're feeling. You don't necessarily want to take a person and just simply say, put my shoes on, this is how I feel, and not give them the opportunity to put your shoes on and they experience how you feel. You want to seek agreement. And it's not necessarily that you'll agree in that day. It's not necessarily that you force them to agreement, but you all come to a happy resolution that is resolving that conflict. If there's a disagreement or argument that was done in front of people, also make sure that you are going and making amends with those people too. My coworker Rika always tells us that the conflict doesn't just happen between the two of you. It's everybody else who's collateral damage outside of seeing the incident as well. You want to begin to identify solutions that can support your movement in gaining a different perspective, and then develop an action plan that will support what it is that you're trying to do with mending the relationship. So those 6 steps again: set the stage, describe the conflict, gain perspective, seek agreement, identify solutions, and develop an action plan. And a resource that you'll get after this, it's a guide that walks you through exactly how to do these steps one at a time. You'll be able to use it in your everyday dealings. You can use it for personal or professional. Conflict doesn't just happen at work. Conflict happens everywhere we are, whether it be good, bad, or indifferent. Any questions about how to solve or resolve conflicts? Okay. I am seeing none. Before we move on, I'd like to poll you just to find out, is this a 3, 2, or a 1? Is this something we can move on? Is this something, it's okay, I understand it, we can still move on, or is this a 1? I need more information about this. In the chat, if you can drop a 3, 2, or a 1, that would be helpful. Thank you. So I've seen some 3s out there, and we will certainly ensure that this presentation is available for you, Ms. Crandall, and everyone else on the call, along with the presentation and also the worksheet that will support conflict resolution for you. I just want you all to be aware that conflicts don't just have an impact on people, they have an impact on business. I was doing some research and looking at the numbers. Conflict doesn't just cost people, it costs dollars. Businesses spend billions of dollars yearly to resolve conflict within the workplace. And that's bringing in mediators, that's absolving issues, settling out of court claims, different areas and aspects where the impact of conflict just isn't a people-to-people conflict. When I had you all type in the chat, what comes first to mind when dealing with a conflict, and you all listed some words, you all mirror a study that was done back in 2019 by Mr. Wiley, who handles the DISC assessments. That frustration, the drama, the gossip, the fights, bullying, all of those words are negative in association when it comes to conflict resolution or conflicts. Conflicts also drag on and exhaust workplace efficiency. Almost 3.2 hours a week are spent on dealing with conflict, whether that be from the managerial lens or from your lens particularly. And again, conflict isn't always a fight. Conflict deals with those 5 areas: beliefs, values, understanding, needs. It all deals with one of those 5 areas. Also, it fuels employee turnover. Employees don't leave the work, they leave their leadership, or they leave the organization. Most people are happy with the work that they do. It's a conflict somewhere that's creating an angst for them to go. It's giving them the understanding that, hey, if I just call off, I don't have to deal with it. If I go out on FMLA, I have paperwork that says I can't lose my job, but I'm definitely not coming into work. And so it creates a stagnation within our work, and it halts the workplace efficiency. It takes away our ability to do things that supports our district overall. And so 40% of people said that they've left a job for an unhealthy workplace. So when you think about it again, workplace conflict just does not involve people, it involves dollars.
Let's go.
3 tips for healthy conflict resolution: practice speaking up when you disagree. There is nothing wrong with you voicing your concerns or opinions about how you feel when there's a conflict. Practice speaking up when you disagree. And remember, your tone and your voice inflections are everything. Your body language is everything when you're dealing with a conflict resolution, because anyone can take anything that you're doing and say that that can be a negative thing. It goes back to that path of action, the story that you're telling yourself. Offer an alternative perspective or an alternate perspective on what might have happened. Again, everyone deals with something, and it may not have necessarily been directed specifically at you, but you have to be conscious and aware that an alternative perspective might be required to resolve a conflict. If you feel tension on your team, address it directly. I know that within the confines of safety and security, you all have, within safety and security, you all have 6 regions. There's a regional support for all 6 areas. With custodial services, you guys have bands in which you all are provided support. I believe there are 4 different bands in which you all support and provide leverage and compromise on teams there. But please be mindful that if you feel tension, you need to address it directly. And that's not address it directly with all the staff, it's address it directly with the person in which you're having the conflict with. If you find that you need someone to support you who is greater in the work than you are, find your supervisor, find that support system that can help you with addressing it directly. Or even if you can't find the words to say, but you know you need to address it, assure that you are dealing with it directly. Don't let it fester. Now, are there any questions about anything that you've heard throughout our entire presentation? As I mentioned, you'll be receiving resources and information that will support your learning as we move forward in this time. But are there any questions about anything?
Okay. Lydia, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
Yes, sir.
I've heard several things throughout the presentation, and I've been taking notes. And there's some things that I heard that we, meaning me and my management team, can take a look at and build on. So thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm glad you were able to get something that you found useful in your day-to-day dealings that will support your efforts with moving custodial services forward. Really glad to hear that.
I may have a question.
Yes, sir.
How do you get to conflict resolution without it coming off as complaining?
I'm sorry, you have a really heavy register, meaning your voice is really deep. I heard you say, how do you deal with conflict resolution when what?
Without it coming off as complaining.
Oh, without it coming off as complaining. Gotcha. So when you're looking at conflict resolution, you first have to come into agreement about what you're talking about. I'll share the screen with you one more time, because I think one of the slides did actually address how you can actually do this. One second. Let me get this back up for you. And so in this slide where we're talking about different types of conflict, it deals with a party's respect for each other's viewpoint. And so while you might be telling yourself a story that it sounds like complaining, if a person can receive it, they can then make a change about it. And so you first want to go in having a clear heart and clear thought about the fact that there is a conflict that you have perceived as a disagreement. So when you're looking at the stance, you're saying, okay, so this for me is something that I need to address. And it's not complaining when it's coming across as being a concern of yours. If a person is willing to hear you, and if a person is willing to make a change for you, they'll be willing to and more apt to listen to what it is that you have to say. So don't discount what you're saying as a complaint, more so as a concern of yours. And you can frame it by simply saying, well, give me the example of what you might be thinking is a complaint.
Lack of work ethic, lack of good work ethic. Like I have an issue with a coworker. I talk about getting to a solution where we both can get to the goal. But I feel like it sounds like complaining, but he's not registering that we both need to work together like a team.
So I think one thing to do is, as my supervisor talks about often, there is an I do, you do, or I'm sorry, I do, we do, you do method to learning things. And I believe you can also apply that when it comes to resolving things like that. So I'm going to model the behavior for you. We'll then do it together. And then I'll allow you to do it on your own. That gives a person the ability to see something happening, to understand that collaborating can make it better, and then moving it forward by that becoming their standard practice. That's just a way that I think you are able to actually kind of help people understand, especially when there's a conflict generationally. And I think I heard you relating to the person is lazy, where their behaviors might be lazy in a way.
Yeah,
hopefully that was helpful.
It's just a work ethic. I just feel like we have different work ethics, and I just want us to be on the same page.
Got it. So I think modeling the behavior of what you expect to see is what really can help you catapult that relationship differently. A person has to be able to see it, and it might not necessarily be they need to see it. They're just lazy, and that's something that you'll have to either through corrective measure begin to look at and say, how can we support this person? Or you can really address that with your leadership and provide them with documented evidence that supports what it is that you need to have corrected in their behavior.
Sure. And thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Lydia, can I just say something real quick?
Absolutely.
So I was thinking too, when I heard that, I think sometime when you're utilizing a new strategy, so now you're addressing the conflict, I think sometimes it can be uncomfortable until it becomes routine. So again, if you're starting to say, even to address with your coworker, when there's an issue now, I want you to know I'm going to be bringing it right to you. I'm not complaining. We work together as a team. We have a goal, and I want us to reach that goal. But in order to do that, we have to address it. So when you're going to them, you have already pre-warned them that you're going to be addressing it. So it can appear not to be a complaint. And the more you do it, it's not going to become a complaint. It's going to become the way you handle conflict.
I totally agree with you, Melvina, having that common understanding that moving forward, you can make a difference in how a person is picking up information. I think that was why that modeling example, I think for me, was really critical and important, because like you said, when it's a new strategy being implemented, a person can certainly say, oh, I didn't know that. Well, let me show you. Let's get this together. Are there any other questions, comments?